The 2021 IEEE Vision, Innovation, and Challenges Summit and Honor Ceremony offers keynotes delivered by world-class thought leaders and technologists. And the highlight of the 3-day virtual event is the recognition of global visionaries whose work has and continues to benefit humanity on a grand scale. Visit the awards website at corporate-awards.ieee.org. We'll include that URL in the show notes for more information. Today, I'm interviewing Professor Ruzena Bajcsy, the winner of the 2021 IEEE Medal for Innovations in Healthcare Technology. Professor Bajcsy received her PhD in electrical engineering from Slovak Technical University in Bratislava in 1967, and then her PhD in computer science from Stanford University in 1972. She founded the GRASP Lab, General Robotic and Active Perception Laboratory in 1979 at the University of Pennsylvania in Philadelphia. She is a member of the National Academy of Engineering and National Academy of Medicine. For the last 60 years, she has devoted her life to fostering new ideas that bridge the gap between man and machine. Thank you so much for joining us, Professor Bajcsy.
You are very welcome.
Now, I want to thank the IEEE student branch at the University of California, Berkeley, for providing the questions that I'll be asking you today. Starting with, could you describe for our viewership what computational anatomy is and how it can lead to improved health outcomes for patients?
Okay. Well, I don't know whether there is really a field such as computational anatomy. You know, I think it sounds a little pretentious, but I will explain to you what is underneath. Anatomy is, as you know, is basically a geometry and morphology of the human or animal species, of their internal organs, how they are positioned with each other, what is their shape. And that's what anatomy is. It's really geometry and morphology of what the different organs are, how they are positioned in the body and how they are related to each other spatially and geometrically. Now, what computation is doing or facilitating is that, first of all, now that we have a lot of computer memory and computer time, it's possible to take these are pictures, three-dimensional objects. You can digitize them. You can divide them into small points of little volume and create a kind of a cloud of points that correspond to this geometry of this anatomy, whether is it of human or monkey or mice, whatever. Okay, so once you have that digital object in your computer, then you can do a lot of different computations on it. And one of them is that which I invented or helped to invent, was that if you have a kind of an idealized atlas of this anatomy, in other words, how you think things should be, okay, of a normal person or a normal animal. And actually, this is this normalcy of this representation is not such a new idea. Leonardo da Vinci did that in the 15th century. So, you know, we have some big giants to follow. Any case, but he didn't have computers at that time, so we have now the luxury that it's in the computer. So you can have that, and then you think measurements of this anatomy in normal, real subjects, whether they are animals or people. And they are very similar to this idealized atlas. But everybody is different, and we should accept that we are similar but not the same. And because we are different, you can ask yourself how close my anatomy brain comes to this idealized anatomy picture, three-dimensional picture. And what I did was basically I invented this mapping, this how close we are, this measurement of how close you are. Now, I have to add that perhaps because I was the first one who did that, I get a lot of credit, but it wasn't the best one. So after me, there were several other people who did much more refined measurements of the similarity. So one should give credit where credit is due.
In one of your group's recent publications, yes, your group presented a spline model for a well-known clinical procedure, the sit-stand test. Why is it important to have mathematical models for those common and well-understood clinical procedures?
Being a computer engineer and electrical engineer and most in the engineering profession, we are proud of the fact that we anchor our work or our discoveries or our approaches in mathematical formulation. And the importance of that is that mathematics is in some ways a idealization of the reality. It's not exactly the reality, but it allows you to perform certain more measurements and computations that otherwise you are just guessing. For example, you can measure more the surface area, the volume, various quantitative measurements that you can measure. And you can also evaluate if you have different people, different subjects, measurements of these different subjects, then you can ask how different they are from this mathematical representation. You know, what is the deviation, okay? And that is also important to understand that although we are similar to each other, but how different we are. And from these differences, many other things imply diseases and abnormalities and so forth and so on. Yeah.
Well, speaking of the similarities, over the course of your career, you have published work in a lot of different fields, from computer vision and motion tracking to packing spheres and understanding how annoying sounds affect drivers. But what is the common thread that motivates the research that you tackle?
Well, good question. The foundational or motivation. Look, I have been in this business of being a professor for 60 years or plus or minus something. And so I made an early in my life commitment to do two things. One is ask some hard questions, which hopefully, if you are lucky, leads to some discoveries. It's not given that everything you will investigate will lead to a discovery, but if you are lucky, you get few, maybe two or so. And so that's one thing that I committed myself, and I will elaborate. And the second thing is to teach and excite young people to be curious and to not to be afraid to ask some hard questions. Now, when I am speaking about hard questions, is really questions that are anchored and are built on the other scientists before us. We stand on their shoulders, so it's foolish to think that you start from completely scratch. You build on the others, and in my case, you build on the discoveries of the physics and biology, and of course, mathematics that others have discovered and shown utility of it. So what I have done and what I have taught my students to do is to look at a problem and think about it, that what are the challenges of the problem that have not been solved yet, and then look at the tools that our predecessors in physics, mathematics, biology, chemistry have developed, and which of these tools can help us to push a little bit the understanding. It is all, in my opinion, the obligation of a scientist in academia is about understanding. Now, if you are lucky, that understanding of the problem and development of that will follow from this understanding will lead to some useful things, either are devices or algorithms or methods or so. But I don't believe that the goal of academia is to make products. We are here to teach and push the understanding of the current scientists 1 inch further.
So with respect to talking about asking the hard questions and looking at problems, I think this past year, a lot of us have been spending a lot of time doing that.
Right.
Specifically, this recent pandemic has made some of us try telemedicine for the first time. Medicare is only recently starting to allow payments for telehealth visits. Why do you think it took us so long?
It's complicated. In general, advances in healthcare and medicine are very complicated. And if you think about it, before this pandemic, there was a lot of emphasis on research in DNA. And that is because, especially in academic institutions. And the reason for that was that DNA is basically, you can do it sort of outside of the body, and it's on the scale of understanding of molecules, which is biochemistry. And you don't have to deal with the human body, where the complexity is tremendous. I'm not saying that DNA work and the protein configurations are not complex. They are very complex. And actually, a lot of the computer technology is facilitating to create and analyze and describe some of these complexities, but is far less complex than the whole human body. Now, if you move this to the healthcare, where what happens here affects the whole body, and you really don't know how to predict how it affects it, or at least most of the time you don't know how to predict. So in order to really perform diagnosis and therefore therapy, because first you need to diagnose and then you can prescribe therapy, are two extremely complex systems that you are dealing with. And of course, the long history of healthcare and medical profession has taught us as a scientific society that we have to be very careful what we promise, because the guarantees are extremely vague, and it's hard to make guarantees. I am going to cure you for this or that. So in that sense, the medical profession is quite conservative, and based on that you really are dealing with life and death. And so people are very, very careful. And so generally healthcare is very careful how it accepts new chemical interventions or physical interventions, machines of some sort, or so you have to sympathize with the health providers that they proceed rather carefully with a lot of testing and a lot of precautions.
I never thought of it that way, but now that you lay it out, it does make sense to me.
Now, the telehealth is just one of those technologies that you are trying to use the technology which enables you to communicate in distance, just like we are doing it now with the Zoom. All right, so you can see things even if you are not physically there present. But the telehealth is part of this. How much can we believe that the diagnostics in this distance way? And the worst part is, how can we intervene in a distance in such a way that we are helping and not hurting?
So do you think we'll use the telehealth more in the long term? And do you think it will reduce the overall cost of healthcare?
In certain instances, yes. Other instances, we will still need to develop a lot of technology in order to make that happen. When I say yes, in distances such as whenever you can convert the diagnostics into some picture or audio or written statement, all right, and say, okay, this diagnostics is I guarantee you the correctness, the accuracy up to a certain point, because nothing is absolutely perfect. Then on the other side, the doctor, the health provider can make some decisions and suggest some remedy, okay? But the person who is making these decisions depends on the accuracy of those diagnostic tools that you are providing. And as I said, if those tools are reliable enough for that particular problem, then the decision maker will make proper decisions. But this is we have to be very careful because it's very limited at this point.
Now, Professor Bajcsy, I always ask these last two questions at the end of every interview. What have you done in your own personal career to take a hard, challenging, or difficult time and turn it into a future opportunity?
Okay, I will tell you. One thing is, all my life, I was looking for problems without any success expectation. So one thing I would say that, those of us who make progress, we don't go into these subject curiosity-driven research with expectation that we will be famous or we will be successful. You go into that business because you are curious and you really want to know the answer. That is the driver, okay? Now, having said that, you really have to understand that in these days, and certainly during my whole life, you think about problems, but you are also benefiting, not only, as I said before, from the people who were before us, like Leonardo da Vinci and Newton and Lipschitz and all these scientists who were before me, but also from the people who kind of created your own community. Because in these days, and in fact, during my whole career, it was not just one discipline that contributed to my thinking, that, you have to, and I was blessed that I was in an environment where I can listen and learn from other people, such as in this case from anatomists and biologists and medical people, but also from physicists. And I never learned very much chemistry, but invariably you have to read few things about that. But I also read quite a bit of psychology, because when you think about the human, you can't just think about it as a simple machine. It's very complicated, and that's what psychologists are studying. And so there is a tremendous literature out there to benefit us. Now, in the past, many psychologists were more descriptive rather than quantitative. That was the tradition. But in these days, it's not anymore. They are learning quite a bit of mathematics and tools from electrical engineering and other engineering that, and their observations and their discoveries are extremely relevant to our work. So science is not anymore a single subject. If you want to make progress, you have to be willing to learn things that are on the boundaries between more than one discipline. And that requires dedication, because, here I am, I'm not a youngster and I'm still learning. You can't give up on that, because there are new ideas coming up, new tools are being developed. And if you really want to make progress, you want to use everything that is available in the scientific community to make progress towards this understanding.
I love what you're saying about curiosity. I really appreciate you talking about how much you've learned from others. I have learned a lot from you just this morning. If people want to follow your work, is there a best way to do that? Are you active on social media? How can we keep touch with what you're doing in the world?
One last thing I want to say, that I have been lucky that I never was rich, but I never was poor. What I mean by that I did what I did not because I was looking for making money. I was lucky to have enough, or I adjusted my lifestyle to the amount that I was paid, but I was paid enough to enable me to pursue this career. So my message to the young people is, you need money to survive, but anything above is a gravy, and you have to ask yourself how much more money you need in order to really push or push your career. And I'm concerned that sometimes money is too much emphasized.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for taking time out of your morning today, Professor Bajcsy, to join us. I really enjoyed this interview.
Take care. Very good. Thank you.
Thanks for joining us. If you enjoyed this episode, please click like below and also subscribe to see future episodes.